You actually thought you deserved a seat at this table. You're nothing but a disgrace.
Don't you dare cry over that food, Amara. It's just dinner. He doesn't deserve your tears. Clara's small voice trembled as she spoke. The voice of a child standing in a kitchen too big for her innocence. Steam curled up from the stove, wrapping around the two of them like a ghost of comfort. Amara blinked rapidly, her lashes catching the tears that had started to fall before she could stop them. The words she had heard upstairs still echoed in her skull. Laughter, sharp and cutting, bouncing against the crystal chandeliers and mirrored walls. "Fried chicken?" Alexander had said between cruel chuckles. "My God, is this what passes for cuisine where you're from?" And his guests had joined in. Businessmen in dark suits, wives with diamonds heavy enough to drag their necks down. The sound was symphonic, a storm of mockery. Amara had stood there, her tray trembling slightly, her knuckles whitening around its edge. Every ounce of dignity she had fought to protect since childhood had cracked in that moment. Now, in the quiet kitchen, she knelt to Clara's level. "I'm okay, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice soft as linen. "Go back upstairs before your daddy finds you here." Clara's eyes, wide and glassy, reflected the fluorescent light above. Eyes too wise for 8 years old. "He was wrong, Mara. The food smelled good. You made it special for him." Amara smiled faintly. She brushed a curl away from the child's face. Sometimes grown-ups forget what kindness tastes like. Outside, the rain had begun to fall. It slid down the tall windows of Whitestone Manor, a slow, sorrowful applause for the night's cruelty. The story of this night began hours earlier. When Amara had entered the mansion that afternoon, her shoes were already soaked from the drizzle. She carried a paper bag under one arm. Inside, her grandmother's worn recipe book, pages wrinkled and stained with the fingerprints of love. She had spent days planning tonight's dinner. The Billionaire's associates were coming from New York, and Clara had begged her to make something happy instead of the usual cold imported dishes the chef prepared. So Amara had decided. Fried chicken, collard greens, sweet potatoes, and cornbread. A southern table, humble but honest. She'd set the table herself, polishing the silver until her reflection blurred in it. Every fork and knife was placed at perfect right angles. She even folded the napkins into lilies, something her mother had taught her to do when she worked hotel banquets. When Alexander walked in, tall and commanding in his tailored navy suit, the air changed. His cologne smelled of cedar and steel, and his presence was magnetic, both fascinating and frightening. "Is this dinner ready?" he asked, without looking at her. "Yes, sir," she murmured, her hands clasped behind her back. He glanced at the spread. Golden chicken glistening under warm light, steam rising from bowls of greens. His eyebrow twitched. "What's this?" She hesitated. "A family recipe, sir," Miss Clara requested. He cut her off with a scoff. "You served fried food to men who eat at Michelin-star restaurants? You thought this was appropriate?" Amara lowered her gaze. "It's made with care, sir. He turned toward his guests, a smirk curling at the corner of his mouth. "Gentlemen, I suppose we're having a cultural experience tonight." Laughter. Polite, cruel laughter. Something inside Amara wilted. Clara sat quietly at the end of the table, clutching her fork, her small face pale. When the billionaire took his first bite, he exaggerated the motion, chewed slowly, then laughed again. "Tastes like, well, something my gardener might make." Amara froze. The blood rushed to her face. Her throat tightened. "Take this away," he ordered coldly. "We'll have the chef fix something proper." She obeyed, because she had to, because her rent depended on her silence. But as she carried the tray out of the dining room, a single tear slipped down her cheek. Clara saw it, and though she was only 8, something inside the child's chest cracked open. A deep, unbearable sadness that would not let her sleep that night. Now, as Amara washed the untouched dishes, the kitchen clock ticked in slow agony. The rain grew heavier. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, polished shoes clicking against marble. Alexander appeared in the doorway, holding his phone to his ear, still half smiling from his conversation. He didn't notice Clara hiding behind the counter. "Tell the board the deal's closed," he said briskly. "Yes, at dinner. They loved it." Then his gaze flicked toward Amara. For a split second, his eyes softened, maybe at the sight of her hunched shoulders, or the way she was scrubbing dishes like she wanted to erase herself. But softness didn't last long in him. "Clean up the dining room before you leave," he said flatly. "And next time, consult the chef. You're not being paid to experiment." He left before she could respond. The door clicked. Silence flooded the room. Amara's hands trembled. The plate she held slipped and shattered. The sound was like a gunshot in the empty kitchen. Clara rushed out, wrapping her arms around Amara's waist. "Don't listen to him," she whispered fiercely. "You're better than all of them." Amara pressed a hand to her mouth, trying not to sob, and for the first time that night, she let herself cry, really cry, into the shoulder of a child who understood more than the adults ever would. Outside, thunder rolled. Upstairs, Alexander poured another glass of wine, unaware that the storm he'd started would soon tear through his house, his pride, and his soul. The storm carried through the night like a confession. The sky refused to silence. By morning, Whitestone Manor smelled of rain, marble polish, and guilt. Alexander Voss stood in his private study, a cathedral of glass and walnut. He was on a call with his investors, voice smooth as silk, mind sharp as razors. But beneath the veneer, his thoughts flickered back to last night, to that flicker of hurt in the maid's eyes. He told himself it didn't matter. She was an employee. Emotions didn't belong in business. Yet somehow, that quiet tremor in her voice had lingered longer than any deal he'd closed. Downstairs, Amara was folding laundry in the staff quarters. She worked with mechanical precision, jaw tight, every motion deliberate, as if control over sheets and uniforms could fix the things beyond her control. Clara appeared at the door, barefoot, her nightgown wrinkled from sleep. "Mara!" Amara looked up, forcing a smile. "Morning, sweetheart." Clara held something behind her back, a small drawing, edges bent. She stepped closer, revealing it shyly. It was a picture of Amara at the dinner table, surrounded by plates of food. Beside her was Clara, smiling. Alexander stood at the far end, arms crossed, a frown scribbled across his drawn face. At the top, in shaky handwriting, Clara had written, "Good food makes hearts good." Amara's breath caught. "Clara, you drew this for me." The child nodded. "I'm going to show Daddy, so he says sorry." Amara froze. "No, Clara, please don't. That's not how the world works." "But it should," the girl insisted, lower lip trembling. "He hurt you." Before Amara could stop her, Clara ran up the grand staircase, tiny feet thudding against marble. Alexander had just hung up his call when the door burst open. "Daddy!" He turned, startled. "Clara, what?" She marched right up to his desk and thrust the drawing toward him. "You made Mara cry." He blinked, caught completely off guard. "Clara, lower your voice. What are you talking about?" Her eyes filled. "You laughed at her food. You made fun of it in front of everyone. That wasn't nice." Alexander sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Sweetheart, you don't understand. It was mean," she cried, stomping her foot. "You said her food was bad, but it was good. You didn't even taste it right." The billionaire, ruthless, undefeated, feared by entire boards, stood speechless before his daughter's trembling fury. He looked at the drawing, the childish lines, the shaky words. Something about it hit harder than it should have. Still, pride won over conscience. "Clara, Amara works for us. She's not your friend, and you don't talk to your father that way." Clara's tears spilled. "You're not my real daddy," she shouted before running out sobbing, leaving the picture behind. The words hit him like glass breaking in his chest. He sat down slowly, the echo of her footsteps fading into silence. In the kitchen, Amara froze when she heard Clara's cries echoing from the stairs. She hurried out, heart pounding, and found the child curled near the banister, her face buried in her knees. "Clara, what happened?" The little girl lifted her tear-streaked face. "He said you're not my friend." "But you are. You're the only one who listens to me." Amara knelt, pulling her close. "Hey now, you don't have to cry. Sometimes grown-ups forget what it means to listen." Clara sniffed. "Do you hate him?" Amara hesitated. "No, baby. Hate doesn't fix hurt." "Then what does?" She thought for a long moment before answering. "Maybe someone showing him what kindness really looks like." Clara nodded solemnly, the way only children who've seen too much sadness do. Later that afternoon, Alexander stood by the window of his study, staring out at the rain-dark garden. He saw his daughter below, holding Amara's hand as they fed the koi fish in the pond. They were laughing softly, ripples of warmth in a house built from ice. Something in that sight unsettled him. He remembered another laugh, his ex-wife's, before she'd left him 3 years ago. She had told him he didn't know how to love anyone who couldn't be perfect. He had laughed at her, too. The same laugh he'd used last night. He closed his eyes. The sound of it now made him sick. That evening, the house fell into uneasy quiet. The chef didn't return. He'd called in sick after the chaos of last night. Dinner duty fell, again, to Amara. When she entered the kitchen, Alexander was already there. He turned when he heard the door, startled. I didn't expect you yet," she said softly. He cleared his throat. "The chef's not here. I thought I'd make something myself." Amara blinked in surprise. "You cook, sir?" He gave a short laugh. Not cruel this time, but self-deprecating. "Barely. But Clara says she won't eat unless it's with you." So, their eyes met. A brief, awkward pause. The power dynamic shifted, just slightly. "Then let's make something together," Amara said gently. "If you don't mind taking direction." He almost smiled. "You're giving me orders now?" "Just in the kitchen," she said. And somehow, for the first time, the air between them wasn't heavy. It was hesitant, but human. They worked quietly. Amara chopping onions, Alexander stirring the pot under her instructions. Clara hummed nearby, pretending not to watch. When the scent of food filled the air, a rich, familiar warmth. Clara giggled. "Smells happy again?" Alexander looked at her, startled by the simplicity of it. Smells happy. Maybe that was what the house had been missing all along. He looked at Amara, her face illuminated by the stove light. Calm, gentle, a quiet resilience he couldn't name. Something twisted inside him. Something like regret. And yet, his pride still whispered that apologies were for the weak. He told himself it was enough to just stand there and cook beside her. But he was wrong, because the world outside that mansion and the judgment of his elite circle was about to remind him how fragile his pride really was. The next dinner would not only test him, it would break him. The following Friday, Whitestone Manor buzzed with preparation. The marble floors gleamed like ice. Staff rushed between the dining room and kitchen, polishing, arranging, obeying every order barked by the billionaire's assistant. Tonight was another business dinner, one that could cement Alexander Voss's new real estate empire. Investors were flying in from Chicago. Journalists, too. Cameras. The house had to look flawless, and so did he. Alexander stood before his mirror, fastening the silver cufflinks that bore his initials. His reflection stared back, immaculate, intimidating, unfeeling, just how he wanted it. But beneath the crisp white shirt and the calm facade, something restless stirred, a flicker of guilt that refused to die. He hadn't apologized, not for the last dinner, not for the laughter, not for the tears he'd pretended not to notice. Every time he thought of it, he remembered Clara's words. "You made Mara cry." They echoed louder than any deal he'd closed since. Downstairs, Amara moved quietly around the kitchen, checking on dishes. She had chosen simplicity tonight. Roasted chicken, potatoes, and a garden salad. Nothing fancy. Her hands trembled slightly each time she heard the echo of men's voices upstairs. She didn't know whether to fear or forgive. Clara had been her comfort all week, sneaking into the kitchen, reading storybooks as Amara worked. The little girl had become a secret heartbeat in a house that otherwise felt mechanical. As Amara placed the final dish on the counter, Clara appeared, holding a small folded napkin in her hand. "Mara," she whispered, "I wrote something for Daddy." Amara smiled faintly. "Oh? What did you write?" Clara hesitated, then handed it to her. Inside, written in wobbly blue ink, were the words, "It's okay to say sorry. It makes your heart grow again." Amara pressed the note against her chest. "You're a brave little girl." Clara looked up, eyes serious. "Do you think he'll ever say sorry?" Amara didn't answer right away. She glanced at the ceiling, where chandeliers glittered above a man too proud to kneel. "I think everyone says sorry when they finally feel what they've done," she said softly. Clara nodded, thoughtful. Then she slipped the note into her pocket. At 7 sharp, the guests arrived. 6 men in designer suits, their laughter filling the halls. Photographers snapped pictures as the staff moved like clockwork. Alexander stood at the head of the table, every inch the commanding tycoon. He welcomed them with perfect charm, shaking hands, offering wine. Amara entered quietly from the kitchen, carrying the first tray of dishes. Her uniform was spotless, her movements precise. She placed each plate with practiced care. But when she turned to serve Alexander, she froze, because Clara stood behind him, still in her school dress, her hair tied with a red ribbon, clutching the folded napkin she'd shown Amara. Clara, Alexander murmured in surprise. Not now, sweetheart. Daddy's working. The guests chuckled softly, indulgently, but Clara didn't move. She stared up at him, voice trembling but clear. You hurt Mara again last time, she said. You never said sorry. The laughter stopped. The air turned heavy. Alexander blinked, stunned. Clara, that's enough. We'll talk later. Tears welled in her eyes. No, you made fun of her. You laughed at her food and made her cry. Why do you always hurt nice people? Gasps rippled through the table. One of the guests shifted awkwardly. Alexander's throat went dry. Clara, that's inappropriate. It's the truth, she shouted, slamming the napkin onto the table. You said her food was bad, but you never even finished it. You're mean, Daddy. She burst into tears and ran out of the room, sobbing. For a long moment, no one spoke. The guests stared down at their plates, pretending to check their phones. The silence was suffocating. Alexander's jaw clenched. He could feel heat creeping up his neck. Humiliation, fury, shame, all tangled. Amara stood frozen at the side of the room, eyes downcast, wishing she could disappear. Finally, he turned toward her. His voice came out cold, brittle. You see what you've done? Her heart twisted. Sir, my daughter shouldn't be crying at my dinner table. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The injustice struck her like a slap, to be blamed for the tears of a child who had only spoken truth. She bowed her head. I'm sorry, sir, he exhaled sharply. Just clear this. As she turned away, the investors exchanged glances. Quiet whispers rippling through the polished air. Words like rude, cruel, heartless followed him like shadows. For the first time, Alexander's confidence faltered. Later that night, after the guests had gone, the mansion was still. He found Clara asleep in her bed, her small body curled tight, her lashes wet. Beside her lay the napkin, unfolded. It's okay to say sorry. It makes your heart grow again. Something in his chest cracked open. He sat down at the edge of her bed, head in his hands. The memory of his own father surfaced. A man who never said sorry either. Who had taught him that love was weakness and success, the only currency that mattered. He had become him. Every word, every look, every cruelty. Downstairs, Amara stood alone in the kitchen, wiping down the counters. Her eyes were dry now, but her spirit felt heavier than ever. She looked around the silent, glittering space, the stainless steel, the perfection, the emptiness. Her grandmother's voice came back to her from long ago. Baby, people can polish silver until it blinds them, but if they don't polish their hearts, they'll still eat in the dark. She smiled faintly through the ache. She had planned to quit in the morning. She couldn't stay where dignity came second to pride. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this night's quiet fractures had been noticed beyond the walls of the manor. Because one of those investors had recorded the dinner, the child's outburst, the billionaire's cold reaction, and by morning the world would see it. It began with a single post. By dawn, it had spread like fire. A grainy video, recorded discreetly at the previous night's dinner, flooded the internet, titled, "Billionaire Humiliates Maid as His Daughter Cries." The clip was short but devastating. It showed Clara's trembling voice defending Amara, tears streaming down her small face as Alexander dismissed her. It showed his cold tone, the way he snapped, "You see what you've done?" to the maid who had only stood silently. Within hours, the world had an opinion. Disgusting behavior. Poor child. She's the only one with a conscience. That maid deserves better. Fire the father, not her. By morning, Alexander's PR team was in chaos. Stock prices wavered. His phone exploded with calls. And down in the quiet servants' quarters, Amara was packing her single suitcase. She folded her uniform carefully, laying it in the bag as if it were made of glass. Her fingers brushed over the embroidered initials, WM for Whitestone Manor, and she let out a long, shaky breath. She hadn't even looked at her phone. She didn't need to. The energy in the house told her everything. The whispers from the other staff, the flurry of cars pulling into the driveway, the paparazzi outside the gates. Clara's door creaked open behind her. "Mara," the small voice asked, soft and sleepy. Amara turned, forcing a smile. "Hey, sweetheart." Clara rubbed her eyes. "You're leaving?" Amara hesitated. "It's just better this way, baby. Things are getting complicated." Clara shook her head, her little fists clenched. "No, you can't leave." "Daddy needs you." Amara's throat tightened. "He doesn't need me. He needs to learn to be kind." The child's eyes shimmered. "He will learn. I'll make him." Amara knelt, taking Clara's hands in hers. "No, darling. You've already done more than most grown-ups ever could." You reminded him what love looks like. Clara broke into tears. "Then why are you going?" Amara hugged her tight, rocking gently. "Because sometimes love means walking away until people are ready to see you clearly." Upstairs, Alexander stood in front of the enormous living room window, watching the media vans outside his gate. His reflection stared back, pale, exhausted, haunted. His assistant stood a few feet behind him, holding a tablet. "Sir, it's everywhere. CNN, BBC, Twitter." "I've seen it," he interrupted sharply. "They're demanding a statement. People are calling it racial discrimination, child emotional abuse. Enough!" His voice cracked like a whip. The assistant swallowed hard. "Sir, I think you should apologize publicly." Alexander turned slowly, his jaw tight. "You think a statement fixes this?" "No," she said softly. "But humility might." He dismissed her with a wave, but her words lingered. Humility. It was a language he'd never learned. That afternoon, he found Amara in the foyer, her suitcase by her feet. She stood tall despite her small frame, wearing a simple white blouse and faded jeans. Her dark curls framed her face, and her eyes, deep brown, calm but sorrowful, met his without fear for the first time. He froze. "You're leaving?" "Yes, sir." "Because of the video?" "Because of everything," she said softly. He stepped closer. "You have no idea what this has done to me. My company's falling apart. Her expression didn't change. "You're worried about your company. I was worried about surviving your laughter." He blinked, speechless. Amara's voice didn't rise. "It didn't need to. You humiliated me for serving food from my grandmother's recipe. Food that came from love. You didn't just mock dinner, Mr. Voss. You mocked a piece of who I am." He opened his mouth, but she went on. "And I took it, because I needed this job. But your daughter saw it. She saw something no child should ever see. A man she loves choosing pride over kindness." The silence after that felt eternal. For the first time in years, Alexander couldn't summon words to defend himself. He looked at her, really looked, the way her eyes glistened but didn't break, the way she carried dignity like armor. He felt small before her. Finally, he whispered, "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," she said gently. And maybe one day you'll mean something better. She lifted her suitcase. Please tell Clara I said goodbye. He took a step forward. Amara. But she was already walking away, her footsteps soft but final on the marble floor. Hours later, Alexander sat alone at the dining table. The same table where he had once laughed. The plates were gone, the candles cold. Only the echo of his own emptiness remained. He stared at the seat Amara had once stood beside, and the words of the child's napkin burned in his mind. It's okay to say sorry. It makes your heart grow again. He closed his eyes. For the first time in his adult life, he wished for someone to forgive him. Not for what he'd done, but for what he'd become. That night, Clara refused to eat. I want Mara back, she said. Staring at her untouched plate, Alexander's voice broke. Sweetheart, she's gone. Then bring her back. He swallowed hard. She doesn't want to come back. Clara's small shoulders shook. Because of you. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. I don't want to eat with you anymore. And then she ran upstairs, the second person to walk away from him that day. For a long time, Alexander sat in the silence that followed, his heart pounding in the echo of his daughter's footsteps. Something inside him cracked completely. He got up, left the cold dining room, and for the first time since he'd become a billionaire, since his empire had made him untouchable, Alexander Voss fell to his knees. He wept, not out of shame alone, but out of longing, for warmth, for forgiveness, for the simple humanity he'd spent his life burying under gold. Outside, the rain began again, soft and cleansing, and far across town, in a small apartment filled with the smell of collard greens and cornbread, Amara whispered a prayer for the little girl she missed, and for the man she'd left behind to find his soul. The morning after his collapse, Whitestone Manor was no longer a fortress. It was a shell. Reporters crowded the gates, shouting questions through the iron bars. Mr. Voss, is it true you mocked your black employee on camera? Will there be a public apology? Where is the maid now? Inside, Alexander ignored them all. He sat in his study, unshaven, eyes hollow. His assistant hovered nearby, holding her tablet like a shield. Sir, she said quietly, the board is calling for an emergency meeting. They're worried about investor confidence. He didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the rain-smeared window, where his reflection looked like a stranger. Sir? He finally spoke, voice low. Cancel it. Cancel? But I said cancel it. I've built empires from nothing. If it all burns, it burns, the assistant hesitated. Then, what do you want me to tell the press? He turned his head slowly, eyes tired but resolute. Tell them the truth. Across town, Amara was sitting on the edge of her bed, clutching her phone. The screen glowed with notifications, hundreds of messages, comments, articles. Some defended her, others dissected her pain as if it were a product. But one message stood out, a simple one from an unknown number. Please let me explain. For Clara's sake. AV. She stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering above the screen. She almost deleted it. But then she thought of Clara. Her laughter, her hugs, her drawings, and her resolve softened. She typed back, I'll hear you, but not for you, for her. By afternoon, Alexander stood outside a small cafe downtown. No cameras, no suits, just him in a dark coat, hands trembling slightly as he spotted Amara through the window. She was sitting by the corner, her posture upright, her gaze unreadable. When he walked in, the quiet murmur of conversation dimmed slightly. Even here, people recognized him. The man from the viral video. He sat across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, softly, she said, "You wanted to explain." He nodded, swallowing. "I deserve every word people are saying about me. But I needed to tell you. That night, I wasn't laughing at the food." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. He continued, voice shaky. "My ex-wife, Clara's mother, used to cook. She was Filipina. She made dishes that filled the house with the same warmth yours did that night. When she left me, I told myself I'd never let anyone bring that kind of closeness into my life again. It made me feel weak, vulnerable." His eyes glistened. "When I saw you serving that meal, it reminded me of her, of everything I'd lost. And instead of being grateful, his voice cracked, "I chose to destroy it before it could reach me." Amara's gaze softened, but her voice stayed steady. "You can't erase cruelty by explaining it, Mr. Voss." "I know," he said quickly. "But maybe I can start by owning it." He took a deep breath. "I'm going to hold a press conference. I'll tell the truth, everything, about what I said, what I did. No lawyers, no script." Amara tilted her head slightly, studying him. "And what do you expect to gain from that?" He shook his head. "Nothing. Except maybe a way to show Clara what a real apology looks like." A faint silence hung between them. The hum of espresso machines, the clink of cups, the pulse of rain on glass, all blurred around their quiet table. Finally, Amara said, "Then make it real. Don't say sorry to save your image. Say it to save the man your daughter still believes you can be." He met her gaze, and for once there was no arrogance there, only remorse. "I will." The next day, cameras flashed again, but this time he faced them willingly. Standing behind a podium outside his office tower, Alexander Voss began to speak. His voice trembled on the first few words, but he didn't stop. "I've built my life on control, on being untouchable. But last week, I hurt someone who showed me more grace than I deserved. I mocked her for her heritage, for her kindness, for her humanity. And I taught my daughter the worst kind of lesson, that power excuses cruelty. It doesn't. So today, I'm saying what I should have said the moment I saw her tears. I am sorry. Publicly, privately, sincerely." The crowd went still. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. "I have placed Miss Bennet on paid leave and offered her full reinstatement, if she wishes. But whether she returns or not, I'll be changing the culture of my company. I'll be changing myself." He took a deep breath. "Because a child shouldn't have to cry to make her father see right from wrong." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was hesitant, human. But it was real. That evening, the video of his apology went viral too. But this time, the tone was different. He actually owned up to it. That Maid's strength changed him. Maybe there's hope after all. Amara watched it alone, sitting on her couch with a blanket wrapped around her. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. When the video ended, her phone buzzed again. A short text from Clara. "Daddy said sorry to the whole world. But he told me to tell you he still owes you one more." Amara's lips curved into the faintest smile. Outside her window, the city glowed. Soft lights against the drizzle. For the first time in weeks, she felt something gentle returning. Maybe forgiveness wasn't an instant. Maybe it was a quiet unfolding. One act of truth at a time. Meanwhile, at Whitestone Manor, Alexander sat on the edge of Clara's bed, watching her sleep. Her tiny hand clutched his sleeve even in dreams. He whispered, "I'm trying, baby. I'm really trying." And from somewhere deep in the quiet, he thought he could almost hear her mother's voice, and Amara's, blending into one. Then keep trying. That's what real men do. The storm outside had finally cleared, but the real change, the one that mattered, was only just beginning. 3 weeks later, spring light spilled across Whitestone Manor, softening what had once felt like stone and steel. The staff moved differently now, quieter, but freer. The mansion that had lived under Alexander Voss's shadow was finally breathing again. The tabloids still buzzed. Some called his apology a strategic move. Others called it redemption theater. But those who had seen him up close, the gardeners, the drivers, the cooks, knew something had shifted. Because Alexander had changed how he moved. He no longer barked orders from the staircase. He greeted people, remembered names, even smiled, awkwardly at first, but real. Still, there was one room he couldn't bring himself to enter, the dining hall. The memory of that night, the laughter, the silence, Clara's tears, hung there like a ghost. Until one morning, Clara tugged on his sleeve and said, "Daddy, can we have dinner with Miss Amara again?" He froze. "Sweetheart, I don't think she'd want—" "She told me she might come back," Clara said, grinning. "I sent her my drawing. The one where you were smiling at her food." Alexander blinked. "You, what?" Clara nodded proudly. "I told her I wanted to finish the dinner. The happy one we didn't get to have." He felt his throat tighten. "You're too kind for this world, little one." She said, "Kindness is strength," Clara whispered. "Did you know that?" He smiled faintly. "I'm learning." That evening, the manor doorbell chimed. The sound echoed through the hall, and every servant froze for a second before one of them hurried to open it. There she was, Amara Bennett. No uniform, no apron, just a simple navy blue dress, modest but elegant, her hair pulled back into a soft bun. The rain outside had left tiny glimmers on her skin, and her eyes, those steady, deep eyes, met Alexander's with calm neutrality. He approached slowly, unsure if he should smile or bow or speak first. "Amara," he said quietly. "You came." "I did," she replied. "Clara invited me." He nodded. "Of course!" Clara rushed down the stairs, her laughter ringing through the hall. "Miss Amara!" She threw herself into her arms, and Amara knelt, hugging her close. "I missed you too, little one." Alexander stood there, hands clasped behind his back, watching the scene with an ache that was part regret, part awe. "Would you stay for dinner?" he asked finally. "No staff, no cameras. Just us." Amara hesitated for a long beat, then nodded. "If Clara insists, I do." Clara beamed. The dining room looked different now. No candles, no gleaming silverware, no cold formal settings. Just a warm wooden table, 3 chairs, and the soft glow of lamps. Alexander himself had cooked. It wasn't elegant. His mashed potatoes were lumpy, the chicken slightly overdone, but the effort was honest. When Amara saw the meal, her lips curved into a small, genuine smile. "You cooked this?" "I tried," he said, chuckling nervously. "I may have overestimated my skills," Clara giggled. "He burned the first chicken," Alexander groaned. "Traitor," Amara laughed, a sound Alexander hadn't realized he missed. "Well, It smells better than the last time we ate here." Her joke landed softly. And just like that, the ice melted. They ate, talked, and laughed. About Clara's school drawings, about the dog she wanted, about how Amara had started taking online culinary classes. Alexander listened more than he spoke, his usual dominance replaced by something gentler. At one point, Clara excused herself to fetch a drawing she'd forgotten upstairs, leaving the two adults in silence. Amara looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You're trying." "I'm trying," he echoed. "Some days I get it right. Others," he exhaled. "Others, I still see the man I was." "Change doesn't erase who we were," she said softly. "It just gives us the choice to be better next time." He nodded. "Would it be too much to ask if I said I wanted a second chance to make things right between us?" Her eyes lingered on his face. "A second chance for what, Mr. Voss? Forgiveness or friendship?" He paused. "Both, if you'll let me." For a long time she didn't speak. Then she smiled faintly. "We'll see." At that moment, Clara came running back, waving a crayon drawing. "Look, it's us at dinner, and everyone's smiling this time." Amara and Alexander leaned in to look. The drawing was crude but beautiful. 3 stick figures holding hands, plates full of food, hearts floating above their heads. And beneath it, in a child's uneven handwriting, "Love fixes what laughter broke." That night, after Amara left, Alexander stood at the window again. But the reflection staring back wasn't the same man. He wasn't untouchable anymore. He wasn't afraid to feel. He whispered her words to himself, letting them settle deep inside. Kindness is strength. And for the first time in his adult life, he believed it. In the city below, Amara walked home beneath the soft drizzle, her coat buttoned tight. She felt light, not because everything was perfect, but because it was real. She looked up at the glowing windows of Whitestone Manor in the distance and smiled quietly to herself. Some stories didn't need fairy tale endings. Some just needed people brave enough to change. The next year unfolded like a slow sunrise, tentative at first, then brighter, gentler, unstoppable. The world had moved on from the viral scandal. New headlines replaced old outrage, but inside Whitestone Manor, something tender remained. A quiet redemption that didn't need cameras or applause. Amara Bennett no longer wore the uniform of a maid. She had left service work months ago, enrolling full-time in a culinary arts program downtown. The scholarship had arrived anonymously at first, until she found out who sent it: Alexander Voss. When she confronted him about it, he didn't deny it. He simply said, "You were already teaching me. I just wanted to return the favor." She didn't thank him, not then, but her silence had been its own kind of gratitude. One spring afternoon, Clara's birthday came around. The mansion was decorated in wild color: paper lanterns, flowers, children's laughter echoing through the halls that once held only tension and command. 42. Dining table, the same one that had witnessed humiliation and heartbreak, now overflowed with handmade dishes. And at the center of it all stood Amara, laughing as she iced Clara's cake, wearing an apron that read, "Head Chef of Chaos." Alexander stood a few feet away, sleeves rolled up, carrying a bowl of frosting with surprising care. He wasn't the tycoon right now, just a father, a man in soft shirt sleeves who had learned that love could be built in small, humble gestures. Clara ran up to Amara, cheeks dusted with flour. Miss Amara. Daddy helped bake cookies, but he burned one side again. Amara grinned. Then we'll call it extra crispy, okay? Alexander raised his hands in mock surrender. Hey, at least I'm consistent. The room rippled with laughter. No one would have believed that this was the same house where cruelty had once lived. As the party quieted later that evening, and the guests began to leave, Alexander found Amara out on the back terrace. The golden light of dusk brushed her face as she looked out over the city. "Beautiful night," she said softly. He nodded. "It is." For a moment, they simply stood there, the silence between them easy now, comfortable. Then Alexander said, "There's something I need to tell you. Or maybe—" "Ask." She turned toward him, one eyebrow raised. "You're serious, so it must be something big." He smiled faintly. "Big for me, maybe. Small for the world." He took a breath. "I don't want to erase the past. I know I can't. But I also know what it taught me. It taught me that the people we underestimate are often the ones holding us together." His gaze softened. "You've changed this house. You've changed me. I don't know what the right way to thank you is, but I know I want you to stay in our lives. Not as an employee, not as an obligation, but as family." Amara's lips parted slightly. "Family?" He nodded slowly. "Clara already sees you that way. And if you'd let me, I'd like to as well. Maybe we could—" He stopped himself, realizing the weight of his own words. Not as a confession of romance, but something deeper. A reaching out, a gesture of genuine human love. The kind that asks nothing in return. Amara looked away toward the horizon, eyes shining. "You've learned well, Mr. Voss," she whispered. "But I think you already have a family. You just needed to open your heart to it." He smiled. "Maybe so. But it feels like it's finally complete with you here." She met his eyes again, and for the first time, she didn't look at him as her former employer, or even as a man to forgive. She looked at him as an equal. "I'll stay," she said quietly. "For Clara, and maybe for myself too." Later that night, the three of them sat together in the garden, Clara between them, drowsy from cake and laughter. The city lights shimmered below like 1,000 tiny stars, and the wind carried the scent of jasmine through the dark. Clara murmured sleepily, "This was the best birthday ever." Alexander smiled, brushing a curl from her forehead. "Because of Miss Amara?" Clara nodded without opening her eyes. "Because everyone was smiling." Amara's gaze met his across the child's small shoulders, and in that look, quiet, unspoken, they both understood. It wasn't just forgiveness that had bloomed here. It was healing. Not the loud kind that demands recognition, but the steady kind. The kind that rebuilds a life brick by brick, word by word, kindness by kindness. Years later, the legend of the billionaire who laughed and learned to kneel faded from the internet. But inside the Whitestone home, its lesson endured. Not as a headline, but as a heartbeat. The dining room, once a stage for cruelty, became the soul of their family. And every year on Clara's birthday, Amara would make her signature dish, the same one that had sparked everything, and they would sit together at the same table, hands joined before the meal. Before eating, Clara always recited her own little prayer, one that had grown with her since childhood. "Thank you for food, for love, and for second chances." And every time she said it, Alexander and Amara would exchange that same quiet smile, the kind only two people could share after surviving a storm together.